Welcome to Money and Freedom, the podcast where you learn to become financially free using value investing. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm going to talk to Mar Häusler, who used to work in London as a trader, was super focused on money. Then she went on a spiritual journey, completely rejected money, and she came back to money. And today she works in the intersection between money and spirituality. Welcome to Mar.
How are you
so today?
Yeah. I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
What a journey. So I'm German-Chinese mixed. I grew up in Singapore and I moved to the UK to study when I was 18 to university. And that's how I got into finance. I had this crazy career at a very young age, trading over 100 million in profits for the bank. But questioning money, questioning our relationship to it, questioning what it really was, having hit all of my dreams and aspirations by the age of 26.
Wow.
I had these goals in mind. I wanted to make X amount of money. I wanted to be promoted. I wanted this.
What were the goals?
I wanted to have €1 million or dollars or pounds it was at the time. Yeah. I was heading towards that. I was
In
being
your
paid
personal
that.
finance?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Then I wanted to be promoted every year. I wanted to be MD, managing director, before I was 30. I was being promoted every year as I was going up. It was the crises of 2007 to 11. And so as I joined the trading desk, everyone was being fired when I was joining because they were just losing money. And so I started trading just super young, and I had an amazing mentor who taught me how to do it. And I don't know, I just picked up the ropes. You know, sometimes we're good at things. And I ended up having huge clients, big hedge funds, asset managers, pension funds, and really just being able to understand the market and trading through it.
What was it about money when you first started working that attracted you?
Yeah, for me, money seemed like freedom. For me, I just thought, okay, if I have the money, I have freedom. And that's what I aimed for. And I knew at the time in finance was the place to make it. You know, it was the time of Wall Street, the Wolf of Wall Street movie. I was living that as a woman, but it was amazing. Yeah. I mean, it was incredible, really living through that. But I realized at some point it wasn't all about the material things.
So what specifically happened that made you question the journey you were on?
Yeah, there were incidences, one after the other. It was like, I always feel like life kind of whispers into your ear, then taps your shoulder, then gives you a nudge, and finally like pushes you, you know? And I felt like that was what was happening. Like at some point, things were not going so well with certain members on the desk, then certain clients, like it was just inappropriate behavior, I felt, you know. Then my dad got ill at Christmas. I started questioning, you know, how many hours I was working.
How many hours were you working? How was life like?
Yeah, I was starting at 5:30, 6 a.m. because when you are the youngest one on the desk at the time, you had to be there before the markets opened, write the review, you get everything up and running. And then we would close with the markets around 6 o'clock, finish the books. You had to calculate your profit and loss accounts. And then by the time it was 8 o'clock, you might be out. But then when I got into clients and client relationships, it was going for dinner with them. You were out every night. And it ended up just becoming like a full life.
Wow. I mean, what time did you have to get up? Because in London, it's not that easy to get to the office, right? It takes time as well. So when were you home even?
No, so what I did was I started off living in West London, in Kensington, and I realized it was just impossible because I had to commute on the tube. It wasn't even open at the time. I would have had to take a taxi. It was just, and I didn't want to be sitting at 5:30 in the morning in the tube. And so I moved to East London. At the time I was working at UBS, which was in the city, so Liverpool Street, and I moved to Shoreditch, which was a 10-minute walk. For me, that really changed my life. So I could walk to the office. I was walking distance to most things. And of course, I was going out with clients. It was on the other side of town, but that was with the company. So,
but it sounds like you know, then you were going out with clients afterwards. Sounds like might have been fun as well, but it also sounds like that you had time for your own life from what? 11,
hardly.
12 until 5 o'clock in the morning or something
Exactly.
like that?
It was hardly. Sometimes we were out until 2 a.m. partying. You know, I was waking up again at 5:30 in the morning to go to work. Honestly, I was burning the candle at both ends. And when I look at it now, I was joking with some friends recently. They were saying, I used to drink 2 Red Bulls for breakfast.
Wow.
Walking to work.
Wow.
And that was my breakfast. The most unhealthy life. I could even not imagine it now. And they were all saying it was completely gross. They couldn't believe it. But it was that trader life. It was the, you know, like high adrenaline, you know, going in the office. What I loved, though, as a woman in that space was that the numbers spoke. So it was all about your profit and loss, and anyone could say whatever they wanted, but I had my name and my number.
Tell me a little bit more about that. So how did you trade? Did you do it differently from the men?
Yes, so this was always the interesting thing, I thought. I figured out that if I made 100 to 200 or 300K a day over a whole year, I would have a huge profit. The issue was that the guys were trading huge risk. So they were taking massive risk swings. So they'd be up $1 million a day, down $1 million, up $2 million, down $2 million, hitting their risk limit. I was a little bit like, okay, if I bag this every single day, I will hit at the end of the year one of the highest profits on the trading floor. And that's what happened. The first year, I made $65 million for the bank. And I think there was only one other person, a man who was a super old trader there, who made that amount, and everyone else was down. And they just couldn't believe it. And they're like, okay, this was a fluke incident. Like, you're just starting out, you're young. And I remember the second year after that, they're like, okay, how much are you going to make? And I was like, okay, I'm going to make 10 million because it was going to be a hard year. And they said, if you make 20 million, we'll pay you X amount. Everyone was losing money that year. And I made over 45 million.
Wow.
But they didn't pay me what they said they would. This is kind of how the industry works. You know, it's all deferred. So you get paid in money that isn't really yours because it's deferred over 3 years. So it's a bit like the donkey and the carrot. And that's what I started realizing. There were so many people around me who had started living these lives according to their deferred shares, you know, buying properties, you know, putting kids into private schools. Fine, all of that. It's your choice. But I didn't feel like they were happy anymore. But because you had all this deferred shares, you're going to be paid a third in a year, a third after that, a third after that. I realized if I wasn't going to leave at that point, I would never leave because I had in deferred over $1 million a year. So coming back to that, I was like, okay, if I don't make this step now, I will be tied into this system. Yeah, and that's why they call it the golden handcuffs, because you're really there. And you've made these life choices that then are very difficult to undo. And I was still very young, in my mid-20s. I had made X amount of money. You know, I had this cash, and I just thought, I want out. Like, I want to try something different. So I took a sabbatical for 6 months, and I traveled the world, and I left London, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, there's a life outside of there. It was, you know, it was a box.
How did that feel? You were so young, you've been working so hard, and you went to, what was the first place you went?
Well, I kind of think I didn't really have a burnout per se, but I think it was coming. So because before I left, I remember my mom or someone told me about a meditation teacher in London. So a year before I left, I started meditating. But I went there, and I remember it was a Saturday morning. I was half an hour late, like hungover, you know, from a night out. And he was like, would you like a cup of tea? And I was like, that's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a long time.
Wow.
And so I sat down and I started meditating. And he was like, you just need to do 5 minutes a day. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have 5 minutes. So he gave me like a phrase or something to say, an invocation that I was like, okay, I can say it twice on the way to work. So with my Red Bull in hand, 10-minute walk, I would say it.
What was the phrase?
It was something about the violet flame. So it's an invocation that exists. It's like, I remember it even now, but it's like, beloved I am, present bright, around me seal your tube of light from ascended master's flame.
I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, it was just like something he had told me about putting a flame around, protecting my energy as I went into the space.
Ah, okay.
And
So it's like having an energy, a violet energy around you that will protect you on the trade desk.
Exactly. Okay. And so I started that. And I feel like that moment created a bit more space and then a bit more space. And I realized, oh, things were shifting because I think we're so busy in life that we pack everything that we don't make those spaces. And that led to me meditating 5 minutes a day and then half an hour a day. And by the time I left the year after, I was meditating every day. I'd stopped going out so much. I put my limits. I re-questioned many things. But also it was really funny because the market crashed twice that year. And twice I had an insight the day before to sell. So the first time I did it, I was the only one who made money because everyone was full of risk. The second time I did it, they were all like, okay, she's a witch, she's crazy, let's all start following. But they had too much risk on. I was always quite lean. And I think between men and women, which we touched upon before, men just took bigger risk, bigger swings every day, whereas I just knew if I bagged a little bit every day, and I think this is the same as you probably talk about in your investment journey, but as women invest, I would make the money over time, and I did. And so I wasn't taking that massive risk, but I was having a bigger reward compared to everyone.
You have all these studies that show that women are actually better investors. I don't know if it's true, but one of the things these studies say is that women are more careful. They're more, they look into the future. They don't take that many risks as men do. What do you think of these studies?
Yeah, I do think there's some truth to it because I saw myself doing it on the trading floor compared to men, you know, and also I think it was such a testosterone driven environment. You know how men, like, they speak about it. I mean, there is still a lot to be changed, I think. More women to speak about money, more women to speak about investing with each other, empowering each other. That narrative's not much there. And I was one of the only women traders on the floor with hundreds of men trading. So it was a man's world, you know, there was testosterone. They were bigging each other up. They were comparing each other. So there was that there. I didn't have to play into that game. And I think these studies have some truth to them, right? I do think women are wired a bit differently than men are in that sense. And women think differently. I always think around money, like men, you know, especially with clients I've worked with, but it's very much like men are motivated by money much more than women are. I've realized that my women clients, if I tell them you're going to make more money, they're like, what for? There's much more intrinsic value that is needed. So it's not just about setting goals, but really having their values behind it that makes a difference for them.
Having the why in place. Why am I doing this? Another thing I was thinking right now is, so if you have this environment and you are not sleeping enough, you're drinking 2 Red Bulls for breakfast, that feeds into this risk-taking, doesn't it?
Of course. I mean, at the end of my time there, I realized that most of the people were probably on coke, like going into the office trading, because you cannot survive it. So that's what I also think propels the market how it is. Because how are you supposed to be in an environment where you're sleeping X amount of hours? You know, I was drinking Red Bull in the morning, coffees all day to be awake, but then you are wired. Your whole system is working on adrenaline. It's a completely different environment. You have 8 screens in front of you, 2 phones, intercoms, screaming prices at people. I remember I still have like a pain in my arm because I was trying to click as fast as I could to trade.
What were you clicking?
Yeah, exactly.
Sell up, buy, whatever
exactly.
button. Yeah.
You know, so
trigger finger.
But that's it. And so I think the whole environment is wired to that, but we don't need to play into this. The thing is, we start buying into that narrative. And I think taking a step back, like what I like to say to clients, and I'm sure we'll touch upon it here, but it's like if we can start seeing all of this from like another perspective and not be taken into the emotional roller coaster of that, we trade completely differently. And I remember when I was there, I would see things differently. I would take a macro perspective. I would sit down in the morning. I'd analyze things. And the head of the trading floor every day would come to me and say, what do you think about the market? What do you feel? I would have conversations with my clients because I would know their willingness, their incentives, what they were wanting to do. And that informed my decision versus me overdriving, you know, and trying to get taken over by my emotions. Of course, it happens. We're all human, right? We cannot say like, yeah, I'm going to, you know, deny this. But it's how do we handle this? You know, how do we work with this? How do we plan things ahead? How do we, you know, follow a strategy we might have put into place to make that happen?
We will get to your journey, but it's such an interesting period in time that you experience. I want to dwell a bit more on that time at the trading desk. You were there during the financial crisis. When did you start working?
2007.
Wow, it's such an interesting time. Tell us what did you see during those days when the news about Lehman going bankrupt broke? What happened?
I mean, it was just crazy. It was so surreal. We would come in and things were just changing. I mean, on one level, we were trading. I got given all the debt of AIG, Lehmann Brothers, because it was worth nothing. So I was trading basically the bonds there, making markets around them. But what was crazy for me at the time was that when I joined the trading desk, they were like, okay, you can be an assistant here because we need help because someone got fired. And then after like, I can't remember how many months, 6 months maybe, everyone next to me started leaving because they were taking too much risk, they're being fired. And at some point someone turned around and she's like, she's the bad omen here. Because since she joined. But the thing was there was so much risk being taken and people just losing massive positions.
So if they lost money, they would get fired? Or how did it work?
Yeah,
Why were they getting fired?
Work like if you lose money, but it was like they were losing a lot of money at the time, you know? And so things were rethought, positions were retaken. And so things adjusted. That was inside. Seeing the risk, waking up. I mean, we never thought this would happen to Lehman Brothers, right? It was just like even AIG, just things were like so surreal. but then hearing the stories on the outside of the people impacted as well. I mean, what really kind of hit me after this time was that we were in these rooms trading this money, like a bit detached from the world, right? And then I went traveling and I realized the consequences of this. I was meeting people from Ireland who had mortgages 5 times the amount their houses were worth. You know, they had to leave, they left their lives to go traveling. I met people in Spain who had lost everything, you know, and then I started realizing, oh, we're sitting in these rooms completely disconnected from the world, trading this, you know, going out, partying, like living this high life. But the consequences of what is happening is impacting people's lives. This was a big shift for me where I started realizing I need to do something else around money.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But we're not finished with the trading desk. Specifically that day, what do you remember from that day when the news broke? Like, what happened? Were people screaming? Were they like...
Yeah, everyone was just like, what is going on? Like, you just saw the markets tanking. Like, you don't have... At some point, you don't have risk stops in place either. Like, you know, you have certain risk limits and stuff, but it's just like without a bottom. Like, it's just falling. And you're like, okay... You know, I think I learned to trade in a time where it was so volatile, and probably the bear market, right? For me, trading in bull markets, I'm just like, what's going on? You know, most people are used to the market just going up. I was used to the market going down. Like, how do you trade in these moments? How do you make sure that you have the right mechanisms in place? We obviously had hedges with CDS, other things, but still, it's pretty surreal if you think of it. And people just sitting there. I mean, I sat next to people who lost their jobs. They had families, you know. They had risk on them. They're like, I never thought this would happen. You know, and this is time and time again what comes through, right?
And you didn't lose money during those days, or you lost money too?
No, I was quite young, so I wasn't allowed to take a lot of risk at the time. And I was trading the things that were like very illiquid. So what actually happened was why I made so much money was that they kind of gave me stuff that was completely illiquid. So I made like 5 to 10 point bid offer spreads on bonds. But I started making markets on things that no one was making markets on. I started figuring that out. So as I started doing that, I got more and more bonds to trade, let's say, because I was on the credit side. And what happens is, so when you're in the bank, you're not on the buy side. You're on the... Like, you have hedge funds, clients, asset managers who are buying the prices. You're making the markets. So you're taking risk on both sides. So it's really the bid-offer spread where you're making the money and knowing what positions clients are taking, where the market is going. So I always say to people, it's a very different thing of working on the buy side, having strategies, which you need to think about, and making markets where you feel what the market is. It's called a market maker. You have to give liquidity to the market, to your clients. And so you have like another nose for the market, but you also know what's going on. You hear from the hedge funds, you hear from the asset managers, the pension funds. I was trading with BlackRock, like pension funds in the Netherlands, PIMCO were my client. They were just big clients. And so you understood what their take was on the market. So you could integrate that as well in how you saw it. I didn't have to take so much risk, I think, because I understood who was interested in buying, who was interested in selling, and I would match some of my clients together. Everyone had different views, you know, different portfolios, different risk limits, you know, and so that was what I really enjoyed. Like understanding it, putting people together, you know, really learning things about the market. It was really exciting. And at the same time, like you said, there's a lot to stomach. Like sometimes I think now I'm like, could I go through that again? But I've spoken to so many of my ex-colleagues who are still there, and they said that after that time, it's completely changed now. It's not the same environment on the trading floor anymore as it used to be. But I really felt like I recently actually, just over Easter now, a couple of weeks ago, met someone from finance who started just after I did. And he said, you know, you've really had like the best years there. And I think I did. The
best years? I would say the worst years. What would make it the best years?
Well, because when it's so volatile, you know, you can trade. Like it's fun. You know, you learn about the market. I think when it's less volatile, the risks are less. People, you know, the prices are just stable. The thing is, when you're there, when things are changing, I think you're creative. I think there's another energy. And sometimes I wish we could see it like that. When things are just stable, we're like, okay, it's stable, it's good. But when it's volatile, it's like, you know, that's when the things happen. That's where you can start having new perspectives. That's where you can put different trades on. You know, it's kind of that. And then he also said after that, a lot of just the way we lived as traders and the way things we did changed. I think after that, there were much more risk limits. It got stricter, like a lot of banks were losing money. So it wasn't the same anymore. And I think I did live a very interesting time. I learned so much. I loved it. In hindsight, of course, it's a very different life. But it's also, I'm happy I had that chapter and that experience in London, really living that, I would almost say the Wolf of Wall Street life, you could say. We were out partying. I was traveling every weekend. I didn't spend one weekend in London, I think maybe once every 2 months. It was
Where did you go? With clients or on your own?
With clients, with brokers, with people from my desk, alone, with friends. I was really partying, burning,
Can you tell one story about somewhere you went together with whatever clients or brokers and what happened?
Yeah, so, I used to fly to Vegas for the weekend to party. We used to go there to casinos, to gamble. I remember going with friends on private jets. It was just like this life, that...
What was one crazy experience you had?
I remember we got on the roulette table, we put money down on 16 and it got on
how
16.
Much?
And so I can't remember how much we got, but it was just, and then we were like, okay, we're going to get a private jet. We're going to do this. It was just like money came, money went. We were living these experiences. I flew to Hong Kong for a weekend to party.
With whom?
With friends. I used to and then with brokers, we used to go on skiing weekends all the time, heli skiing, jumping off into the powder snow. It was because you're on the trading floor, it's high adrenaline. Life was also high adrenaline. Everything had to be like extremes, next level of partying, next level of skiing, next level of excitement, because it's not enough otherwise. And I think that's what drives the whole system like that, because you're wired like that. It wasn't enough for me just to stay at home. At the end, I craved just being home and having a home-cooked meal.
And we will get to that, but we will get to that in the next podcast. But one more question for today is...
Really? You're like, not yet?
Yeah, it's like you survived Titanic. It's really, really interesting. It's so interesting. I don't think you realize how interesting it really is. Those were special times. I was there too, but on the other side, I was a financial journalist. I covered banks.
I remember you said.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question about the time on the desk, on the trading desk. Tell me a little bit more about how it was to be a woman. And now I don't mean that your trading strategy, how you were not taking that many risks, but more like, what about the environment around you? There were how many women compared with men?
Yeah, I think like a handful of women compared to hundreds of men on the trading floor. And of course, the women traders. Then there were assistants who were women. There were executive assistants. That was women roles. And it's funny that you asked me that, because recently someone said that to me. He said, I'm on the trading floor now. It's a man's world. How was it? And I remember there was a guy sitting next to me. He was older, and he, seriously old school trader. And he used to run behind the broker girls or the girls coming in high heels. It was just gross, you know?
He did like that? To illustrate to the others? Or how?
Yeah, it was always very machoistic. We used to go to strip clubs after work with clients, with them. It was part of the life. I used to have wives calling the desk, and I used to lie for the men because I was part of the team. But I was always thinking, I'm never going to date anyone here. This is horrific. I almost lost all my trust in men. And I remember that guy sitting next to me turned around to me one day, and he looked at me and he said, your boobs look huge today. And I just looked at him and I was like, Nigel, you can say whatever you want about any woman who walks in here, but you don't talk to me like this. And he never said it again. So I had to put my limits all the time. I would go out and drink like the guys. At some point, I couldn't handle as much. I would tip bartenders to give me water shots instead of vodka shots. I kind of had to play the game, but I found my way around it a bit. So I was in the boys' club, but also as a woman. And I've always been a bit of a tomboy. I could always play along, and I liked it on some level. I remember it was part of that story of how I left. There was one night we were out, and there was a manager of a big hedge fund who basically cornered me and asked me to go up to his hotel room. And that was one of the times where I thought, okay, this doesn't feel right to me anymore. And of course I couldn't say anything, right? What was I going to say? He's one of our biggest clients. You're going to report someone like this, you're going to go nowhere, right?
Well, how did you handle it?
It was really, I didn't really deal with it at the time. I kind of just, it happened. But it was one of those nudges that made me realize, I'm not sure I want to be here anymore. I'm not sure this is the environment.
Wait, what happened? Did you go with him or
No.
did you just say no?
I said no, but he was cornering me. He was trying to put the lift on. He was like, leave your bag here, give me your bag, because I would have had to go back to get it. It was just like this really aggressive kind of environment. And then I went down a bit in shock, but who was I going to tell, right? It's all the guys.
You didn't even tell your colleagues or anyone? They could help you maybe, go with you to the elevator or whatever?
Yeah, that was fine. I could get out of there. I knew when I went back to my colleagues, I was fine. What was he going to do? The problem is you're not going to report one of your biggest clients.
Yeah, but there's a difference between reporting to, the senior people and then someone you trust on your level. You can say, hey, this guy is hitting on me. Can you go with me to my room, to the door? And,
yeah,
just
this was
me?
fine.
Yeah, you could do that. Okay.
Yeah, but as a consequence of that, there were things you had to deal with. And I remember once I went to the bathroom during the day. My roommate at the time, she was a really good friend of mine. She said to me, you were coming home crying every single day. And I remember you going to the bathroom during the day because it was so much pressure. And all the women would find themselves in the bathroom, just like sharing and things. And there was one lady, I remember she came in and she was like, don't do what I did. She was turning, I can't remember, in her late 30s. She was like, I just lost my mom. I've given my whole life to this place. I don't have a life. I don't have a partner. And she was like, just don't do it. And I was in my early to mid-20s. And I just remember, some memories where it sticks really hard with you. And then I heard she moved to Australia. She met someone. She's married with kids. But, it's that. You give your life to something. And as a woman, you are committed. We were committed. I was super committed. But it was just too much. Like, there were so many things. And it really was a man's world. Like, it really is a boys' club. Even recently, this guy asked me, he's like, how did you handle this? I used to go skiing with the guys down black pistes. I just remember with my snowboard, we were all snowboarding, but now I go snowboarding. I'm like, oh, this is actually quite nice. I didn't have the best memories because I had to keep up. It was always this pushing and this being on the next level and being part of it. And I loved it on some level. But then on the other side, it's like, okay, what life do I want to create? And I'd lost kind of the hold on my life, I would say. You know?
And this is the perfect place to take a pause. And next week, we're going to talk about the journey that you took. You took a sabbatical and things happened, and we're going to return to that next week. So stay tuned. If you like this podcast, remember to like, subscribe, and give it a nice review on your favorite platform. Remember, none of this is investment advice. It's all education and entertainment. And come back next week to hear the rest of Mar's journey.